Management Committee. I'd like to give a special welcome to Audit Scotland and to Anthony Clark. Nice to see you here this morning. Okay, have we got any apologies?
No apologies, Chairman. 10 members present and Councillor Scobie will be in later in the meeting.
Thank you. Declarations of interest? No, none. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3, which is Audit Scotland's Assurance and Improvement Plan 2013 to 16. I think we're going to have a report by the Director, but also we're going to be taken through this by Mr. Clark. So whenever you're ready, just want to switch on your button. That's fine.
Thank you very much, Chair. Delighted to be here today to see you all again. I'd like to cover 2 things this morning, if I may. Firstly, I'll talk you through the Assurance and Improvement Plan, and then secondly, I'll briefly talk you through our plans to do a review of the shared risk assessment process. But I will be brief because I'm conscious it's a glorious day out there and we probably want to get out in the sunshine. Mr. Haswell's covering report gives you a very good overview of the background to the shared risk assessment process and why we have assurance and improvement plans. This is the 4th cycle of preparing assurance and improvement plans, and it's my 2nd year of being the local area network lead for Dumfries and Galloway Council. You might remember I came and spoke to you last year about the AIP. We've had a very good engagement with the Council throughout the shared risk assessment process, and as a group of auditors and inspectors, we've met with the corporate management team on 2 occasions to talk about the Council's priorities, the risks and challenges facing the Council. You'll see from the document that you have in your committee papers that, as far as we're concerned, this is a good news story. This is a story of ongoing improvement within the Council, and as a group of auditors and inspectors, we see Dumfries and Galloway as being a well-led and well-managed council. We've only identified one area of concern. That was to do with the financial management and control within the social work department that was identified by your local auditors. But as you'll see in the AIP, the auditors are quite satisfied with the actions that the council is taking to address the difficulties that were identified in that audit report. Overall, Dumfries and Galloway Council, because of its low level of scrutiny risks, is not likely to be receiving much scrutiny in the next 3 years. You'll see Appendix 1 to the document sets out the planned scrutiny for the next 3 years. It's pretty light. That reflects the fact that as auditors and inspectors, we are committed to focusing our efforts where they can have the greatest effect. Dumfries and Galloway isn't a council where we think we should be focusing our efforts at the moment. Obviously, risk can go up and go down. You know, it's not a static position, but it's been a good news story for the last couple of years. I'd like to think it will continue to be a good news story moving forward. Happy to take any questions, really, on the IP, if any members of the committee have any queries.
Thank you for that. Members, I've got Councillor McKee and then Councillor Driver.
Who's responsible for the part of the report section, paragraph 18 on page 12? That comes under national risk. It's talking about performance information indicates the council has not yet met the Scottish Government's homelessness target. What sort of target is there for homelessness? Can't understand that at all.
Okay, this is a part of the risk assessment that's prepared by the Scottish Housing Regulator. So the Scottish Housing Regulator are represented on the local area network. My understanding is that the Scottish Government has set a performance target for dealing with homelessness applications and getting people access to appropriate services. And at the time of doing the risk assessment, Dumfries and Galloway Council didn't appear to have met that particular target. It was a point of some dispute, I think, between the council and the SHR, though. That's why we've got in the plan the need for the regulator to get some further information. I think the honest answer to you, Councillor McKee, is that it wasn't clear. We're not convinced necessarily that the council hasn't met the target. SHR felt you haven't, but the council was in some disagreement with the regulator at that moment in time.
Thank you. It might be worthwhile getting some further feedback to the committee on that particular issue. Councillor McKee. Thank you. Councillor Driver.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at page 21 of 100 first. I think it might be a typo. At the top where it says performance management, in the reason for change, the Council continues to develop its performance management business plans now include performance indicators and service committees receive biannual. Should it be biennial because it's twice yearly rather than twice every 2 years?
I think the answer to that is yes.
Right, okay. And if I can come back then to page 14 of 100 with the areas that remain scrutiny are required. Obviously, there's a lot of change in the bottom of that particular box for community and customer services, and it says that no scrutiny is required under community and customer services ICT. Now, with the move of libraries, registration and payment of bills into particular areas, I think there's an area here where we should have scrutiny. And to say that there's no scrutiny actually required in this process is, I think, a little bit premature to say no scrutiny required because of the changes actually happening within the council. I don't know if you want to say something on that.
Perhaps I should be clear about what we mean when we say no scrutiny required. What we mean is that it wasn't an area that we felt we could be doing audit work or inspection work to offer great value. It doesn't mean that there isn't a role for elected members to scrutinise the performance and the developments of the council. So we're using the term in a very particular way, but I appreciate that may be a bit misleading, so apologies if it is.
Thank you for that. It wouldn't mean, Councillor Driver, that we couldn't ask internal audit to have a look at some of those processes as well. So that's something else that we could maybe consider at a later date. Councillor Wood and then Councillor Witts, please. Will I take Councillor Witts first, Councillor Wood? Or got it? Okay.
I think we have lift off, yes. Yeah, just can't get the equipment now, Chair. Okay, it was really to do with, once again, the scrutiny side of it, and you have partially answered it, and that is when you look on page 17, when you're looking at, no, it's not 17, sorry, my apologies. It's the social works section, and it says scrutiny being required. I would have thought that with the amount of changes that's going on within that particular department at present, we would be wanting to continue fairly heavy surveillance and scrutiny of the changes as and when they take place. Also, with regard to homelessness, a similar sort of situation, I think that's an area where we need to continue to scrutinise fairly heavily.
If I could briefly respond. On the social work side of the House, obviously your appointed auditors will be keeping a very thorough view in terms of the changes that have taken place and the Council's response to taking forward its improvement plan. So that is an area that we'll be keeping a weather eye on as a local area network. And on the housing and homelessness side of the House, we meet every year as a local area network to discuss issues around risk and performance. Inevitably, that will be one of the issues that we'll cover at our roundtable meeting later this year.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Wood?
Chair, yes, if you don't mind. With regards to homelessness, I understand that there's a review taking place at the moment with regarding accommodation for homelessness, etc. When's that review going to be completed and elected members get the opportunity to see what the outcomes of that are, and how does that affect this particular?
Councillor Wood, I think these are questions not for Audit Scotland, but probably for our own point of view. And if we deal with questions now for Audit Scotland, and then I'm sure Mr. Haswell will go through the report, and if you wish to ask anything further, then that's fine. Okay, Councillor Witts.
Thanks, Chair. My question is about homelessness as well, and I think it may be for official to answer. I'm looking at page 12, paragraph 19, and I just wanted to ask. This is a curious statement because it says that the number of presentations for homeless people has fallen. One would think that in terms of the current welfare reform Act, there would have been a rise in the numbers. So my question is, I presume that this is a fairly historic piece of data. So yeah, perhaps we may see a change.
The risk assessment took place in the autumn of last year, so it is a historic position. The whole issue of the impact of welfare reforms on homelessness services and services more generally is something that SHR, Audit Scotland or others are keeping a very, very firm view on, because we do think it's a very important strategic risk for local authorities and indeed your partners.
Okay, have we any other first-time speakers for Audit Scotland? No. Councillor Driver, you wanted to ask another question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just maybe a typo again on page 21, which is further down under the risk management side of things, where it says that the risk management policy and associate guidance will come to CMT and Audit Risk Management Committee biannually, instead of taking it as biennially again, every 6 months.
I think I need to get myself a better dictionary.
Okay, thank you very much. If there's no further questions on that, do you wish to add anything?
Would it be
else
okay
in?
if I gave the committee a very brief briefing on our plans to review the shared risk assessment process?
Yes, please, that would be very helpful.
I thought, seeing as I was here, it would be a shame not to briefly explain to you. I mentioned in my introduction, it's the fourth year that we've been doing the shared risk assessments and insurance improvement plans. And our sense is that the process is valued by councils and by committees who find it of some use. But it seems to us that there are diminishing returns setting in. You know, it isn't offering the impact and value in terms of reducing the level of scrutiny that we hoped it would, and indeed it did for the first couple of years. So we're in the process of doing a review of the shared risk assessment process to try and see if we can make the documentation more meaningful to committees, if we can make the outcomes more useful in terms of delivering audit and inspection that is more relevant to councils. And we know that we have a big job on our hands to deal with national versus local risks. So the shared risk assessment is very much focused on Dumfries and Galloway Council, Scottish Borders Council, Glasgow City Council, and so on and so forth. There's lots of audit and inspection work that's driven by Scottish ministers and nationally. We need to find a way of getting a better connection between the nationally driven work and the locally driven work. We're conscious too that councils and others have been going through a great deal of reform recently. You know, there's a welfare reform that members have mentioned. Police and fire changes have been taking place as well. There's all the work that's been going on around community planning and the review of community planning. We want to reflect on whether or not we should be changing and adapting the shared risk assessment to better reflect the public service reform agenda. So we've got a small working group set up as part of the review. We're planning to make the changes so we can introduce it round about this autumn or winter time. So when I see you next year, you might find that the documentation that you have in front of you will be a wee bit different from this year. We're also planning to go to speak to some council chief executives to get their views on what's working and what's not working, because obviously we're doing this process not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of councils as well. But I just thought I'd mention it while I was here because I thought you might be interested.
Thank you very much for that. It's useful to know what we might be getting further down the line. Okay, I think somebody had a question for Mr. Haswell. Councillor Wood, do you want to? I think they'll both be worried.
Now there's a chair asserting herself. I think it was to do with the housing, wasn't it, if I remember rightly, the homelessness. What I was asking was, there's a review going on at present within council with regard to the houses that are being available by landlords, private landlords or otherwise, that it's looking at the estate available for the council to use for homelessness. Has that review been completed, and what is the outcome of that review? And will we be looking at extending that or reducing it?
My understanding is there is a report to be forthcoming to the Housing Subcommittee looking at the homelessness estate. As the report says, that this council uses a mix of accommodation for temporary emergency accommodation and moving through. There's private landlords, we use the housing associations as well. Bed and breakfast, which is not an ideal situation for homeless persons. I've got to be perfectly honest with members and say that, but I know that my colleague John Lynch has been looking at that. The review of the housing service, there will be a service review of the housing service coming forward to members as part of the budget process for next financial year. So members will, through the housing subcommittee, get a lot more information and then be able to scrutinise exactly how the homeless or the housing service works.
Thank you for that. I do really feel that it's something that should be discussed at Housing Subcommittee, Councillor Wood. However, can we move to the recommendations, please? And are we quite happy just to accept the recommendations? Okay. Yes, with the amendments. I mean, obviously we've asked for some feedback, so we will get feedback to this committee. Thank you.
Given some members' lack of a grasp of the English language, if you use plain English, it makes it better as well.
Sorry, Councillor Mickey, I missed that.
I says, given the lack of grasp of the English language of some of the members, it might be better to use plain English.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, members, we're going to move on to item number 4, which is the Health and Safety Progress Report. And I think Sue's here to take us through this report. So if you'd just like to come forward.
Hiya. Members are asked to note progress on the corporate health and safety management arrangements within the council and consider key events within the previous 6 months. I was just happy to take questions, really, because it's the 6-monthly report. I think a new addition on this one.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks, Chair. One of the improvements that we had with the health and safety report was to ensure that committees had reports every 6 months coming to their major committees to see how their health and safety is actually doing. Can you tell me how many reports have actually went to committees in the past year?
What, all committees? Well, there has been it's only at the Audit and Risk Management Committee. It is within the corporate plan for health and safety to be progress reports on health and safety to be given at service committees. And it hasn't. We are aware that it hasn't gone to service committees, and that's why it's now in the corporate plan to ensure that it does in the forthcoming year. It is discussed at joint safety committees, and it is at audit and risk management committee.
Councillor Dryborough, would you like to come back in on that?
I mean, we agreed the health and safety plan more than 6 months ago, was it? And one of the things I'm hoping is that directorates actually take on board what the plan is all about. And I would have hoped to have seen, at least at some of the committees, a health and safety report to their committees, whether it be DG First, whether it be education, whether it be social services. And if it hasn't happened, then we need to make sure it happens within the next 6 months to at least half of those committees.
Thank you, Mr. Haswell.
If you like, I can report that back at the next committee in December and give you that assurance that that's been done for those that don't sit on those service committees, get that assurance.
Chair, can I help? The intention was that health and safety issues would be part of performance monitoring reporting. So I'm not aware of having seen health and safety specifically mentioned in the performance monitoring reports, but I'll address that.
I spoke to the performance monitoring team and they've included health and safety within the template. But, so even though it wasn't in the template before, it should be for the future.
Okay, well, we'll make sure that, we'll need to keep a record of that to make sure that we actually see things happening at service committee, because it is important that the services are aware of any health and safety issues that they may have. And I think that we should make sure that that happens. And I'm presuming at our next audit and risk committee, we'll get some feedback, because obviously there'll have been some monitoring reports being drafted for service committee. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Chair. We know the directors report to the Chief Executive on a monthly basis, so it's not a huge job, I would suggest, that a summary of that is reported to the respective committees as and when. And the vast majority is that your eyes glaze over, but the important things, I think that's the bits we need to see, where there have been real risk and how they've dealt with it. So I think Archie's absolutely right. It's something for now rather than 6 months' time.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ferguson. I mean, we have made a decision as an audit committee, and therefore we would expect that decision to be taken forward. So we hope to see that, and we'll have some feedback at our next committee about it. Councillor McKee?
No, I quite agree with what's being said, but I would prefer to see firm dates set to write service committees September, October, to give safety reports, and 6 months thereafter. Because if you leave it open-ended, we could be waiting to this time next year before we get the first report.
Chairman, I will ensure that the template for the monitoring reports now includes a health and safety issue. or a paragraph on health and safety. I think rather than be concerned that you're not getting reports, members should be reassured that we're not coming to you saying X, Y, Z has happened this week and how terrible this is. Health and safety is taken very seriously in the Dumfries and Galloway Council, and as the Councillor Ferguson has said, on a monthly basis, I see all of the statistics relating to health and safety, and the Chief Executive sees them once a month as well when he has his one-to-one with directors. So it's a relatively simple thing to passport a paragraph into a monitoring report, and hopefully 9 times out of 10 it will say there are no health and safety issues to report in this monitoring report. But we can assure you that we are fulfilling all of our requirements under the legislation. Hopefully that would be what would be coming forward.
Thank you. I've got a number of other speakers, so can I let them in first? Councillor Wood, then Councillor Witt.
Yeah, it's just on page 30, Chair, with regard to the training that's been taking place at Gareth. I noticed that first aid at work, it's a very low uptake when you consider the number of people employed in the council. Am I right in saying there's about over 7,000 people still employed in the council? And we have 23 who have done the training. Is this not something that we need to...
I think it's only for the period.
Yes, it's only for the period. It's only for that set period. It's only for the period of over the 6 months.
Can you give us an insight as to what the overall figure would be?
Not off the top of my head. Not off the top of my head, I couldn't know.
Can I therefore ask them to try and bring it down to certain categories? How many elected members have first aid training?
First aid training.
Councillor Witt.
Thank you, Chair. I refer to page 30 and the Gareth training sessions, and specifically the needle sticks, sharps. Does this encompass arrangements for provision in the community of bins for disposal of these items? And if so, obviously that's a very sensitive issue, but perhaps it's something that members should be more aware of, if it's on a confidential basis, to where these bins may be placed.
Councillor Wicks, it's a high-level training schedule, so obviously it wouldn't drill down into that sort of detail. However, maybe Sue, you would like to answer?
Yeah, the training is for council employee training, so it's raising awareness of staff that have to actually undergo activities that they may come across needle stick sharps. The fact of the provision for community facilities is that it wouldn't be part of the training itself.
Councillor Dryburgh, do you wish back in?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it's on the safety for elected members. I have to say it was quite a good day's training that we actually went up and had at Gareth. But can I come back to what Mr Haswell actually says about reports back to committees and things like that? I think it's really important to involve members, because all members have got good experience out there in the big bad world, and we can bring that experience and hopefully some examples of where good practice is actually held, and that would help the continuous improvement plan for the health and safety. So I think it's important that just by, rather than having sort of one sort of paragraph of, you know, it's all well and good in this department, is that we have, you know, the situation where if, for instance, there is certain accidents happening, then there is good experience out there that we could probably bring to that particular thing.
Clearly, we report where there are accidents, and we will continue to report where there are accidents. Well, I'm not saying that we won't report them. What I'm saying, my aspiration is that we don't ever have to report them. But that's...
Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure if it's a question for Sue or for taken away elsewhere, but I noticed on page 30 we've got refresher training for IOSH, and then further down at the bottom of the page there's first aid at work. The number was quoted as 23 during the period. Is it IOSH? Obviously you still have a refresher. Is there still a refresher for first aid at work? And the question I'm going to ask here is how many members of staff appreciate you kind of off the top of your heads too, but maybe find it out some other way, have had to do the full 5-day courses because they didn't get the time off from their day job to go to the refresher training.
I'm happy to include in future reports how many first aid full courses were done and how many refresher. And no, not off the top of my head, would I say the Gawick training records on that. I can't, top of my head now.
Do you want further information on that, Councillor Ferguson? Because it might be that we could get some further information to members and maybe just circulate it to members.
Well, I think, you know, it's more a cultural thing I'm talking about here, because if people aren't either slipping through the net and they're no getting picked up with their management saying they're needing that refresher training and their certificates run out of date, it's much more cost effective, right, than you know, or a misplaced sense of budget, because letting people off. And we need to guard against that, because there are a significant number, I believe, who are actually certificates run out and have to do 5-day courses.
I know Gawick do have a training database which is based on historical information, so that it's automatically recalled when the date is due. But I can't actually say to you, yes, that they attended.
Thank you for that. Councillor Driver?
Maybe I can help on that particular one. IOS training doesn't necessarily have to have a refresher training. It's a one course that you actually do. But it is good practice to have a refresher either 3, 4 or 5 years after the initial training. So, and likewise with first aid at work, it would be down to the first aid needs assessment of that particular work, how many first aiders that you actually require. So I've got no problem with this particular thing, because it is a period thing rather than the whole thing. And it wouldn't be our job to manage the different departments, first aid training, IOS training, things like that. That's one of the things that should go back to the committee reports.
Okay, thank you for that. Can we move to the recommendations, members? We're happy to note the progress. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. We'll now move on to item number 5, which is the ICO follow-up data protection audit report, and Mr. Hazel will take us through the report. Have you got anything further to add, Mr. Hazel?
Very little, Chairman. I'm hoping that members will accept that this is a good news story. There's been a change in the audit opinion. You'll recall that we had a fairly major audit undertaken with, I think there were 41 key actions. We're now working our way through those. In fact, I think there are only one or something like that to be completed. So I'm hoping that members will accept that this is a good news story. It's a follow-up report, and it shows that we have addressed the issues previously raised by the Information Commissioner. There are a couple of issues that we still require to address, and we're moving forward on those.
Thank you. I do think we are moving forward with this, and it is pleasing to see that we are moving forward, although there is no room, obviously, for any complacency. I mean, obviously, a number of councils in Scotland have been fined just lately, and I believe Glasgow City Council was fined £150,000 last week for data breaches. So it is important as a council that we actually keep on top of this process. I have a number of people wishing to come in. I've got Councillor Witt, Councillor Driver and Councillor McKee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 36 and a summary of follow-up audit findings, areas of good practice, second paragraph, procedures for remote working. I'm totally signed up to this. It gives employees flexibility if they are able to do some of their work at home, and wouldn't wish to impede that. But I note that complete security self-assessment. I presume that's fairly comprehensive, because if you're working at home, you want your young children around, totally innocent, computer, for example. I suppose it all depends on the home environment you work in, but I would take it that this self-assessment is fairly rigorous and started in the criteria you would expect.
Yes, I think the answer to your question, it does meet the criteria that you would expect. Correct, Mr. Hazel?
It's defined by the ICO as an area of good practice. I can only assume that it's good practice.
Councillor Driver.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at paragraph 3.3. The council will now maintain its focus without being complacent, and I'm hoping that actually means where we have concerns, we actually raise those particular concerns at the earliest possible opportunity. And one of the concerns that I actually have is the falling hours and redistribution of staff that are in customer service centres. And one of the areas in my particular ward in Gretna, the work employees are actually do not adhere to any sort of reasonable control of data. And I'll tell you why. I mean, there was one member of staff who was actually in the customer service centre between the hours of sort of 3 and 5. And she was in her cell looking after the library, looking after payments, looking after the registration part of things. There isn't a phone that goes direct to the registrars. The actual panic button is attached to the police office, but I don't know which one. And if it's in the Gretna one, that's hardly manned these days. When people come in, there was about 10 people in that I received a health and safety report from Unison. There was 10 people in, and because the one lassie was actually working there, she had the 2 screens up, answering questions from members of the public. And because in the main they were elderly people, she had to shout to those particular individuals. And that, of course, we have to make sure that data is protected, which can hardly be seen as right. So the issue for me is I'm going to be very concerned if we don't get this sorted out when we go to the customer service centres elsewhere. I think the idea of the customer service centres is right, by the way, but I think we need to make sure that for data protection and that type of thing, that it's right and proper that not only the individuals are protected, but the staff are protected as well. And I think that's one of the issues for me. I don't think I'm going to get any sort of reassurance, because I've raised this several times with line management within the Gretna Customer Services, and I keep getting, they're getting trained. They haven't been trained. They were promised they were going to get trained. They haven't been trained. They actually put a modern apprentice actually on the desks themselves without supervision. There's a whole range of issues there within the customer service centre issues that we need to make sure are managed properly. And I think it's right that we raise that here so that management can go, review it, look at it, and make sure something's put in place for the future.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. I think that is a very valid example, and I think it is important that as a committee we take on board that there are issues out there and we do need to address, for want of anything else, especially training, and that is something that as a committee we've agreed that we would like to see going forward. So, Mr Haswell, I'll let you answer Councillor Driver's query, but I think we really need to keep on top of this type of behaviour, because that's what causes our data breaches, and we need to be clear that we need to do all that we can to prevent that from happening.
There are changes taking place within customer service centres, and I'm glad that Councillor Driver welcomes them. Clearly, if there are issues there, I wasn't aware of the issue at Gretna, I've got to be perfectly frank. I don't have knowledge of a health and safety report coming from Unison about it. I'll take the issue of Gretna away, look at it, get it sorted, and replicate the same procedure across all of the customer service centres. I can only say I had no knowledge of the Gretna issue, and unfortunately sometimes things become very anecdotal, so I'd like to take it away and get it sorted out.
Thank you, Mr Haswell. I think it would be useful, because that's been used as an example at the Audit and Risk Committee, it might be useful to see what the process is that's actually been carried out from the fact that we've got an example coming forward. Obviously, I'm not aware of any Unison record either, but or report. So I think it's important that we've got an example here that we can maybe as a committee follow that example that's been put forward today from the example that we've been given right through the process, see what actually has been implemented to prevent, well, obviously, prevention's not the correct word, because obviously we need to manage any risk. We can't say that we can mitigate it, but we can certainly try to manage it. And I think it would be useful for this committee to see it all the way through the process.
I think it's right, because Gretna was the first customer service centre, and there are going to be a lot of learning lessons from that particular area. Where there's customer service centres actually going to be implemented across the region, there's going to be quite a few that we need to learn those lessons quickly because of the data protection issue. But I think to suggest that this is behaviours, I think the circumstances dictate the behaviour of the staff, and that's the issue for me, is that we don't want to be putting our staff in a position where they could actually cause a breach because of the circumstances, not because of their behaviour.
It's a management issue, sir, and we'll address it as a management issue. I'll make sure that Judex, Paul and his team, and also Sue White and her team have a look, see what's happening.
Thank you. And just from an audit and risk committee point of view, it would be quite useful if we could get some feedback on how that process has developed, because obviously you're quite right when we say that this will be being rolled out across the region, and it would be useful to make sure that we have everything in place that we need to have. I think Councillor McKee, you're next.
Aye, thanks, Chair. Just the first thing you mentioned, the fine Glasgow got, I would take it that we'll be looking to get information as to what exactly happened there. The only thing I heard about it was that computers got stolen by the offices, so we need to ensure that we've got things in place for that. And I'm concerned that areas for improvement, we're still looking at this clear desk policy. People are still not complying with that. That's got to be concerning. Faxes, I thought we'd stop using faxes nowadays, but we'll leave that. But I've got to raise the concern that this has been ongoing for quite some time, clear desk policy, and still people are ignoring it, it would appear. On page 41, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph down, it's last sentence, where procedures are in place, there's a lack of adequate controls to ensure compliance, with evidence of some requirements being ignored by departments. Now, it's how do we word something to tell folk that we're not accepting these regulations or these rules being ignored, and they've got to comply with them. And it's how we deal with them after that, I think. But they've really, it's got to be strongly worded. These regulations have got to be followed, and no ands, ifs or buts. And the next paragraph, no centralised record is subject to access, handling and performance, no associated reporting to a central point. Is there no way that can be recorded automatically when people are looking for information for centralised records? That'll do me now, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McKee. Mr. Haswell, can you answer some of those questions? And maybe, Judex, could you come forward, because I think there'll be something in that you may wish to answer.
Insofar as the Glasgow issue is concerned, the first thing I did when I heard on the news was look at the website. ICO is a very good website. You can read the report on Glasgow. Basically, they had some laptops stolen, and then they failed to be able to account for a considerable number of laptops, all of which apparently had sensitive information on them. I checked immediately all of our laptops. We have a record of who's got them, where they are, and they're all properly encrypted. The other issue was the break-in at Glasgow. The ICO made some comments about the ability of people to enter a building, and members will have noted that we're now, in terms of the ICO, every member of staff will have one of those. One of the things we are going to implement and have to enforce is that when someone comes into a building, they get a visitor pass and they sign in. Because at the moment, I'm also encouraging staff, if they meet somebody they don't know in the corridor, not to be nasty, but to say, sorry, can I help you?
Challenge politely, it's called.
Challenge politely. So we are moving on these things. The clear desk policy is an issue. We are endeavouring to enforce it. The message back to management has been, this is a learning curve for everyone. Gently, encourage people. If it eventually comes to a situation where somebody's blatantly disregarding the policy and the rules, then the council has a procedure in terms of management that it will require to go through. We're trying not to be heavy-handed about it. The same relates to the controls to ensure compliance, we are endeavouring to bring forward controls and put systems in place. We have the systems, it's getting people to operate them, and we are moving on that. Again, that's a management issue which depends very much on individual managers and indeed members of staff. If you've got a member of staff who blatantly ignores the rules, you've got to do something about it. So that's taken on board. Insofar as the centralised record, Judex, I know you've been working on that. Maybe you want to say a few words about that, please.
Thank you, Alex. I mean, just to confirm, certainly that's an aspect that we've been working on, as you said, and we're now developing the procedures to ensure that we centralise and we scrutinise the subject access request. I think it's very important that when individuals make requests for information, we also have to look at the legislation in terms of what it is that we're able to disclose and look at the various exemptions that's available for information that we cannot disclose. But in order to make sure that we comply with those requirements, we do intend to centralize the scrutiny of all information before they are released. I think it's important also to make sure that we don't take away or disempower departments to gather the information. I think it's very important that subject as request is about information held, case information which is held by the departments themselves. But I think the initial gathering of that information is important, that rests with the department. What's important is we scrutinise and make sure that the information is appropriate for disclosure and that we meet the requirements, we comply with the requirements of the Act. So the Data Protection Officer, Aaron Linden, will be looking at all those things before they go out. We do have a procedure to bring the stronger controls that the Director mentioned.
Thank you. Councillor McKee, you wish to come back?
If you don't mind, this clear desk policy, with all due respect, and I appreciate what you're saying about softly, and I think that's right to start with. But this clear desk policy has been on for quite some time. I think it's been reported to us a few times. Maybe they need to look at wearing a wee bit heavier shoes. With all due respect.
Thank you for that, Councillor McKee. Have we got any further questions? No? Okay, can we move to the recommendations, please? I mean, obviously we're asked to note, but we have asked for a specific piece of work to be carried out and for some feedback to come to the committee. So with that in mind, can we agree the recommendations? Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Okay, we're moving on now to the Corporate Risk Register update, and Richard Fox is here to take us through that. Do you want to come forward, Richard? Thank you. You're ringing, Councillor Wood. Have you anything further to add to the report, or are you happy to take questions? Okay, thank you. Councillor Bell, you intimated you wish to ask a question.
Thanks, Chair. Just on page 44, 3.8, you know, we've got 3 risks have been added to the corporate register. I just wonder if we can maybe take forward, you know, a joint register with other sectors. Is that possible or not?
Oh, sorry, can you use your microphone?
I think this is something we want to be working towards. You'll note there's a new risk on partnership working, and I think we need to be working with the NHS in particular to try and make sure our risks coincide with each other.
So I wonder, Chair, if this committee could take this forward or not?
I don't see any reason why not. We can make some recommendations. I think it's important that we look into having a joint risk register, but probably not just only with NHS. Councillor Ferguson?
Thanks, Chair. I'm actually wondering here whether we should actually incorporate this as one of the work streams as we work toward the integration of health and social care, so that we would actually get something back jointly, come back to here and the NHS board, rather than having 2 separate reports go to 2 separate bodies.
Members, are you happy with that suggestion? Okay, Thank you. If you could take that forward, that would be very helpful, and some feedback to this committee as well. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Dryborough?
Thanks, Chair. I'm actually looking at page 48 of 100 with the business continuity, and I think it's really important that we ensure that right processes are in place. And looking at the business continuity, how would this risk become a reality? And there's 5 obvious risks that are there. I think there's potentially another one, which is the sickness absence and role responsibilities of individuals, and making sure that those individuals do have a backup system, if you like. If they're on the sick for a long period of time, they have the only responsibility of particular things within their department, and we need to make sure that there is a potential there for having a backup in place for individuals. And what I mean by that is, we mentioned about the protection of keys and things like that. For instance, we've also had reports on the financial side of things and VAT receipts and all of that sort of stuff. And there are individuals within those departments who have that responsibility. Unfortunately, it's just individual. It's only one person. So therefore, we're looking at this particular thing as part of audit and risk to say that they have a backup system in place, because that could have a business continuity risk within it.
Would you like to answer?
I think this is something that doesn't necessarily apply to all staff or all roles, but certainly for key roles, I think we need to consider there's a backup member of staff available, and that appropriate staff are trained to be able to take over their duties as required.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, right. Arch is finished. I'm looking at 3.8, Chair, 44 of 100. Item 1, welfare reform. As we all know, this is an unfolding situation. I've already reported a number of issues to do with people receiving decisions, then decisions having, staff having to be moved, which creates a backlog, which now I understand is a backlog in another place. Also, in terms of the council's decision, its policy of no eviction, where it does not have houses and depends on partnership working. It's what unfolds in terms of these risks, and how is it monitored and audited in terms of proper resources being provided to it as the whole issue unfolds, and people out there are actually suffering badly, more the vulnerable people in society.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. I think it is correct that welfare reform is added to the risk register as we're moving forward. We currently have some issues already, but as we're moving forward, we don't know what's actually going to be out there. So it is important that as a council, we add this to the risk register and keep a very close eye on it. Obviously, I would suggest that the risk register is reported back to this committee more frequently. I think it's important. I mean, obviously, it's held at an operational level. In most private companies, the risk register would be held at board level. And obviously, there is a difference between private companies and public council working. But I do think as an audit and risk committee, we do need to be more clear of what's happening on our risk register and keeping a closer eye on it. And I would hope that we will get further feedback on a more regular basis. I think it's vitally important, especially with all the changes that are happening within the council, not just welfare reform, but within the council management structures, etc. as well. We need to keep a close eye on what's happening.
Delighted to hear you say that, Chair, and an eye is being kept, and the regular reporting back. It's the audit of risk against that and how we respond timorously to the issues. And if we're recognising it as a high risk, as you're rightly pointing out, it's how do we respond to the issues as they unfold, by your own accepting the point I was making, and by your own admission. How we're going to do that under the risk management, and to make sure that the people do receive the services we provide, and that it complies with the policy of the council.
I think that that's something that, I mean, obviously we've got a committee looking at welfare reform, a working group, and I think that's something that should go there. And obviously, they are more than able to discuss that and feed back to committee. This is sort of risk register where welfare reform is being added in, and quite rightly so. So I think some of what you've said needs to be directed at the welfare reform working group, but it is correct that welfare reform is added to a risk register. Councillor Dryborough?
Thanks, Chair, and I agree with what Billy says and yourself, and making sure that we're actually keeping an eye on this through the welfare reform subcommittee. And again, it comes back to the sort of how would this risk become a reality within the actual document itself, and you've got 8 different things there. I mean, there is one that seems to be lacking, which is the lack of support from the Scottish Government and what they can do to actually help as well. I mean, Councillor Scobie mentioned about the no eviction stuff that we've agreed as a council. The Scottish Government, I believe, are still discussing this, and they will keep on doing so as long as it takes, I would imagine. And what Councillor Bell said earlier on, I've got to agree with him as well, and it comes into the partnership working one on page 52, and it talks about the council unable to achieve its priorities due to the weaknesses in partnership arrangements. And we really need to understand what the priorities are and the support that's required for those other organisations, especially in the third sector. And I'm just wondering if there was something that we can do to help manage risk, because we will have, for instance, service level agreements with some of the third sector, and perhaps it's time that we started to review and put more robust scrutiny and governance in those service level agreements, for instance. And I'm just wondering, maybe Alex would like to respond.
I think Councillor Driver has raised the point there in terms of service level agreements. We have existing service level agreements with the vast majority of third sector partners. As you're aware, we're moving towards a commissioning and delivery model in Dumfries and Galloway, and we now advise third sector what we actually are looking for them to do, how we're looking for them to perform in exchange for the resources that the council put forward. So that is a piece of work which is ongoing through probably, I think it's been to Policy and Resources Committee, and it will then go to individual service committees who fund the third sector across the piece. So that is a piece of work that is ongoing. In terms of the risk and the partnership working, we do identify that there are issues in relation to partnership working, and we've got to keep a close eye on it and ensure that we mitigate against any potential problems. Can I just remind members, this is a very high-level document. I would hope that maybe at some point members would want to get a seminar from Richard Fox on more detail and going into the risks in more detail. That might help members.
I think it would be useful for members to understand about the risk register and the fact that it's about identifying the risk and then managing it. And obviously that we have got identifiable risks on this register, and that things can be added on and taken off as appropriate and as we move forward. But I think as a committee, I personally would like to see information coming back to do with the risk register more frequently, because I think as we move forward with all the changes within the council, it is important that we keep a close eye on things. Councillor Driver?
Yeah, I think I agree with you in a lot of what you've actually said, and I think perhaps one of the ways we can improve the audit and risk management process for us as a committee is and we mentioned earlier on about the health and safety reports not going to committees and things like that, but it might be on a rolling sort of programme, ask the directors to come into the audit and risk and give us their assurances or their the issues that they actually see in the future, to see what we can actually go take back to the committees and say to them, you've got to start thinking about this particular thing. Because we're talking, not just talk about health and safety risks, of course, there's business risks, there's priority risks, there's all the different things that we have to do. So it might be an idea for that to actually happen.
Thank you. I would agree with that. I think that each director and directorate and department has their own risk register, and then it feeds into the corporate risk register, and therefore it would be helpful for us as a committee to meet with directors and discuss what's on their risk register and how that overlaps. So I think that would be something that I personally would like to take forward, and I'm hoping that all members around the table here would agree. Yeah. Right, thank you very much. Can we move to the recommendations then, please? So we're noting the comments in the Corporate Risk Register and agreeing the annual process, but also we have asked for more regular feedback to this committee on the risk register, and in particular that directors come to the committee, and we'll set up a programme about that so that we can understand their risks in their department. Okay? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're moving on to item number 7, which is Internal Audit Annual Report, Controls and Assurance Statements for 2012. And Kevin Gerrit is here to take us through this report. Thank you, Kevin. Have you got anything further to add to the report that's in front of us?
No, Chair. I think it's self-contained and explanatory, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Members? Any questions? Councillor Driver?
Chair, I think we see this report regularly on, and how the team are actually doing, and it's quite clear to me that, that they're on target with a lot of their issues. I can't see anything that would cause me any concern at the moment, but if there are any, maybe perhaps Kevin would be able to tell us if there are any particular issues within the plan, the actual and the variance side of things that we can maybe help with.
Thank you. I think this is last year's plan, so obviously we'll have a plan going forward for the next 12 months, and I know that we have a seminar due or a training session due for this committee, and maybe at that point in time it might be worthwhile this committee actually looking at whether or not there's a possibility for the committee to select an area that they feel might be worthwhile having some more scrutiny and audit on a particular area, and that would be something we could discuss at that time and then feed into the process going forward. I understand and appreciate that there's usually a rolling programme, but I do think that as we move forward with changes within the council, that it's important that this committee feed into that process, and if there is an area that we have concern about, then that's what we should ask. Councillor Ferguson?
Thanks, Chair. Having been on the other side of the table, Kevin's team comes a bit like the royal visit, where everything gets painted before they get there. So it's got a sort of self-policing role within itself. What I would welcome as a member of the Integration Health and Social Care Partnership Board would be some joint report on the different strands that will impact on that delivery. And to have, for example, there's 3 risks I've just mentioned in the last agenda item, very specific thing Richard had focused on, but an overview of the 3 and how they impinge would actually be really helpful as we take forward the integration process. And I don't know if that's possible or not, but happy to take advice on that.
Okay, I think that's something that we could discuss when we do our training session, because I would like to, if at all possible, to add an hour at the end of the training session, so as the committee we can actually look at what the possibilities are and feed that back through the process. Councillor Ferguson, you're shaking your head at me.
I think because the process for integration is going at such a pace, we don't have time to wait for a training thing coming. We need something sooner rather than later, because each board, new proposals are coming forward, and just looking around the table here, Councillor McKee is on that committee, and as the work streams are reporting into us, we need that update as it's going along. As the work streams are reporting, we need that updated situation risk register at the same time.
Okay, well, we've already agreed to look at the risk register. So, Mr. Gerrit, can you give us some feedback on the request from Councillor Ferguson?
I'm sorry, Chair, I'm embarrassed. I missed a cue. Which integration are we talking about?
Health and social care. So that's coming together, third sector, local authority, NHS, and the people, families and their carers.
Happy to look into that, Chair. As I say, that the sort of I won't say we're saddled with a process, but I will say we're saddled with a process. The general process at the moment is we have a corporate risk register, we have service risk registers, we have projects risk registers as well. I would say the integration, instinctively, and somebody can slap me if I'm wrong, I would say the integration is a project, and there should definitely be some kind of risk register sitting for that. So we'll quite happily look into that and support development of a risk register if there isn't one for that project. Is that okay?
Councillor Ferguson, I'm in your hands because, you know, obviously we're asking for an internal auditor to have a look at a process, but actually it's not started yet, and normally you would have something up and running before you audited it. So would you like to?
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I think Kevin would be the first to agree with me that you're better involving the auditors before you start a process rather than them come in and audit and tell us what we've done wrong. So I think it's a bit of prevention here rather than and being proactive rather than waiting for a reaction from Kevin's team.
Mr. Hassel, can I bring you in at this point just so that I can get a point of clarification? I just need to be clear in my own mind whether or not I understand what Councillor Ferguson's saying, and I'm not disagreeing that there needs to be some input, but how do we actually do that? You know, and it's not just the council, there needs to be input from NHS and the sector as well.
I think the Chief Internal Auditor has given members the absolute correct answer. The auditors, Councillor Ferguson is quite right. I'd rather have the auditor in at the beginning than hit me over the head at the end. So Kevin has intimated that we will look at the risks associated with integration, and Kevin's team will inform and assist the project team that's taking forward health and social care integration. I think that input is as far as today doing an internal audit of it. I think you might have difficulties doing an audit of something that's in the process, but I think if the Chief Internal Auditor is happy with that, I think he's offered his assistance and that will be taken forward.
Councillor Ferguson, are you happy with that?
His advice will be gratefully received, shall we say. Yep.
Thank you. Right, I have a number of members, Councillor Driver, Councillor Wood and Councillor Scobie.
Chair, at the risk is actually agreeing with you, which would make a change in this actual committee. I do think, yeah, that if a project's set up, there should be a risk register in it, and I'm sure there will be a risk register in it. And I think that, you know, it's not harmful to actually give advice prior to that risk register coming forward from the internal audit, because the internal audit will be saying this is what we'll be looking for, regardless what partner is actually in the actual project, because we have got an in there as part of the council. So it's right, but I think you're absolutely right that the risk register should show what we'd be looking at as well.
Thank you. We're in agreement. That's good. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. It was just with regard to Appendix 1 when we're looking at the main financial systems. Now, while I appreciate there's a statement in here that says that there's no significant matters arising, I am a wee bit surprised at the number of hours extra taken in both the banking arrangements and the accounting. Could you give some sort of clarification and put some meat in the bones?
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to say that, to report on that. The main financial systems is our core work. What we try and do, and this is obviously being last year's plan, this year's plan is different from it. We've got a bit in the middle to do with risks, and members will be aware from the last meeting when we reported the plan. For instance, we're looking at data protection risks on a systematic basis across the whole of the council, so in support of some of the comments that were made earlier. But the main financial systems being auditors and financial focused principally, that's our sort of core business. How I do this is I look at, if you like, the scale of the problem and try and assess how much time is needed for each job. And sometimes, perhaps more often than I'd like, I get it wrong. And this is to do with once we start to look at a system, there may be more complexity involved in it. So, for example, on the accounting audit, I mean, I was quite miserable with 30 days for that because it was a new system. And in fact, we didn't just look at accounting, we looked at other bits and pieces associated with the new Integra system as well. So we strayed a little bit from the true path, shall we say. So it's horses for courses. I mean, we try and, obviously, we try and achieve the plan as a whole and deliver all of the outputs. So in any single year, I'll say to you, I'm going to try and produce reports on all of these subjects. As we go along with the interim reports, I do try and point out when I've got difficulties or perhaps suggest that there may be some work that might have to be dropped or rolled over. And I did that earlier in the year. I was pointing out that we were beginning to overrun our main financial system. but it is to do with the complexity of the work. It is a balance. I mean, some audit teams clip the work, and I find that frustrating. My view is there's a bit of an overhead of getting into a system and understanding it, and once you've made that investment, it's worth pursuing it. There are some sections which would say you've got a 30-day budget, you do what you can in 30 days and then you walk away from it. I tend not to do that. So I do give my staff flexibility to look at other things or other dimensions as they emerge, which means our audits are in some considerable depth, and they can therefore be relied upon because they're not done, they're not done for another 2 years. So that's the sort of general approach I take. But I mean, I'm happy if members and others sort of take the view that, look, you'd rather we distributed the time closer to how we suggest it in the plan in the first place. I'm happy to look at that and begin to consider perhaps restraining our enthusiasm on some pieces of work. But generally speaking, as I say, I think there's a degree of investment for larger systems, and I tend not to restrain the time too much. But that's why these wandered off a bit.
Can I just say, I don't think I would want you to constrain to the number of hours that you've put in. If you actually are looking at something and it takes longer, it takes longer. And if you find something and you need to look more closely at it, then that's what we would expect you to do. So I think it's important. I wouldn't expect you to be constrained to 30 hours if it was a 30-hour time. Thank you. I can't remember. Councillor Scobie, I think.
Yeah, Chair, and like some of the statements you're making and sentiments you're expressing, I would not demur from, but my understanding of previous experience and Kevin explaining, 80% is very much financial, and there's only a 20% window on which you can base, what the internal auditors would like to go and look at and so forth. And I've no difficulty whatsoever with Andy asking for a risk audit to be carried out on something that's to happen. It may at least forewarn them to some of the difficulties in analysis. But when we look at this, because if you do that way, and, as to what you're suggesting, then something falls off the end, because it all can be met. We only need to look at, the budgetary control, and Andy sitting in social work as he is, still trying to razzle with that budget, and already Kevin hasn't, he forecast 56, and he's 14 days down on that one. I'm sure Kevin has an explanation to give. Similar with other planned work. Westran's annual statement, nothing. LGPS, if I understood what the acronym of that, but again, not looked at, and 20 days given. So your flexibility has got to be tapered with that, if the team are working this way, then something's not going to be delivered. And it's where does your priorities lie, Chair, in respect of the plan that comes forward to what's not delivered. And if it's so unimportant as to Westran's accounts and the other one, then drop them.
Sorry, I think priorities is the right word. You did mention the word priorities, and I think that's correct. Kev, no. Kevin, would you like to, please?
Yes, Chair, thank you. As I say, sorry to repeat myself, we try and deliver the outputs from the plan. So some of the detail jiggles about a bit, but we do try and deliver the outputs from the plan. But yes, when we've taken too much time on a job, it means there is pressure then on something else. It was clear to me from fairly on in the year that we were unlikely to be required to produce what are called controls assurance statements, this document, in respect of Westrans and LGPS, which is the local government pension scheme. Each of these are separate bodies, they're separate legal entities, and Audit Scotland had asked us to produce a controls assurance statement for each of these bodies. PwC didn't ask us to do that. So this was, if you like, in my mind, this was an allocation for something which was nominally required, but then in the end wasn't required. So it wasn't a priority, at least not for me, in terms of the rest of the programme. So that was my target, if you like. That's my flexibility zone. You'll also note that on unplanned audit work, we do have a small contingency for that each year. It's only 20 days. And this year, you know, we hit 40 for it. So that is also a variable feast, and sometimes I have to absorb those additional pieces of work as well. If it's a serious problem, if I think the plan is going awry, I report that to this committee and I get your agreement as to what it is we're not going to do or what it is we're going to reprioritise. We do try and keep all the work in a plan intact, so what we would tend to do is roll it into the following year if we can't. So anything that's in here, other than some allocations, like the Swiss Trans stuff, is a relative priority, and we'd try and keep it in plans.
Thank you. No further questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, it's kind of close to my heart. It's the LGPS, is actually the local government pension scheme. Again, like, as Willie's saying there, was it no done, Kevin, because of pressure elsewhere and you had to balance your time, or is it a priority? Because I'm just aware that the report goes to the pension sub. There is a pension committee, isn't there? So would we be doubling up the work, is basically what I'm saying here? Or is it a belts and braces job, or what is it?
I thought you said you did what were priorities. Is that, no, maybe I got it wrong.
That's correct. Both the local government pension scheme now has its own set of accounts that used to be subsumed within the council's accounts. So the work that we did on council activities, such as payment controls and these sorts of things, actually contributed towards LGPS. But because LGPS now has its own separate set of accounts, Audit Scotland asked us to do this piece of work. It was really for their benefit. Nobody else got anything out of it, so to speak. Now that Audit Scotland are off the scene, PwC aren't asking for this. PwC audit both West Trans and LGPS and the council. So since they didn't need it, we didn't volunteer to do it, so to speak.
Okay, given it's my future, I'm quite happy.
Okay, thank you. Can we move to the recommendations, please? Obviously, we've received the report. Members happy with that? And we've got some additions. And we will look at things when we have our training session. Okay? Can we have agreement? Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to the annual governance statement. Mr. Haswell, this is your report. Have you got anything further to add?
No, Chairman, the report should be self-explanatory. This is the annual governance statement which the auditors, external auditors, asked us to include in the audit of accounts. They will review the document as they audit the accounts, and there will be a report back to this committee on the review of both the document and the accounts after the 30th of September.
Okay, thank you for that. I do know that Audit Scotland have asked every council in Scotland to provide this type of statement. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Driver?
Thanks, Chair. I've seen the recommendation that the Leader and the Chief Executive's already signed this, which is fine. But I'm looking at page 67 of 100 with the Scrutiny and Performance Committee, scrutinise the performance of the Council in relation to its policy objectives, priorities and performance targets in individual service areas. Of course, that's not just the job of the Scrutiny and Performance Committee. And I've put a caveat on this, Alex. I mean, I see it 2.2, the Council approved and adopted local code of corporate governance. And I would imagine that every service committee would have that in their detail as well.
Absolutely, it's in the scheme of delegation to committees.
On that then, can we agree the recommendations, please? Members? Okay, thank you. Okay, we're moving on to item number 9, which is the internal audit report issued. And Kevin, you're taking us through these. Okay, have you got anything further to add, or are you happy to take questions? Members' questions? Councillor McKee?
What is the benefit of joining this Procurement Scotland when it comes to contract for the supply of electricity? It seems to be an absolute nightmare where you cannot, this energy costs are set annually and equate to about 65% of the final price. Why is Procurement Scotland no coming up with something that covers the 100% of the electricity costs and gas costs? Seems an absolute nonsense that they're on a day and party.
I don't know if you can actually answer that question, because obviously it's your rules on audit rather than on the purchasing side, but would you like to have a shot at it?
I'll have a go, Chair.
Thank you.
The energy market is a very complex market, and really what we're trying to do here is, you know, the telephony market was something similar. I'm sure you'll all recall a few years ago that your telephone charges were extremely complex. You had loads of different tariffs and extra charges and this sort of stuff, and one might argue that it's immaturity in the market that leads to that, and what we want is a simplified market, which may not come for some years. I think what Procurement Scotland have negotiated is the variable element of the deal. So bulk buying electricity into Scotland for local authorities to use is how the market operates at the moment. But we're simply pointing out that actually it's not the total cost. There are these complex transmission charges and that sort of stuff as well, which makes it a lot more difficult to check your bills.
Thank you. Well, as a former buyer for ICI, I'll not make any comment on that statement. Councillor McKee, do you want to come back?
Oh, so it's your fault they're in the state they're in. There aren't any workers left there.
Councillor McKee, do you want to retract that statement? I left a long time ago. I said a former buyer.
I mean, you started it off. There's 2 or 3 things here. There's this green energy, and I think we all ken that we're paying through the nose for it. And it's whether we should go down that road or not. That's a totally separate argument. Homeless accommodation. It's costing us £14,800 per year for standing charges and homeless accommodation when it's not occupied. And internal audit found for 4 sites in a sample of 13, the maximum demand is less than 100 kVA. And 2 of these sites were new buildings with restrictions. In each case, the unrestricted tariff would be cheaper than the present half-hourly tariff. In one case, £2,000 per year it's costing us. Now, it's these sorts of things that say, you're going to Procurement Scotland, why are they not covering all this sort of thing? We're being left. God knows what we're getting for them, whether we're getting value for money for them or not, but we're being left with costs like this that need to be addressed. And surely a single point of contact would be the best way of doing it, rather than running different. I think you're covering virtually every electricity supplier in Britain. You're getting a wee bit here and a wee bit there, and you're paying charges for them, standing charges for them as well. It's an absolute nightmare, I think.
I know that's a procurement question, but Kevin, would you like to answer?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I should point out, not that I'm seeking to defend Procurement Scotland particularly, but what we're presenting to you here is in effect a split system. We're buying the electricity, the stuff that comes out of the wires, through Procurement Scotland. But in terms of designating particular sites for particular levels of electricity consumption, that is our responsibility. Procurement Scotland have negotiated the contract, and it's for us to add our properties and our locations into that contract. And what we're reporting there in connection with some of these points is that we haven't always done a perfect job on it. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to drive improvement on this within the council. So we've recognised that much better information should be being captured and recorded about electricity charges at various locations. And that's why we're pushing for the software that's to be introduced, really for a plan to be brought in so that that could be implemented, and that will help matters quite a lot. So, you know, it's not entirely down to Procurement Scotland. We do have some responsibility as well, certainly in terms of designating properties that are to go into the contract. And that's where some mistakes have been made, and that's where some of the...
Councillor McKee, do you want to come back?
Just quickly, I know if you're reading it, it's quite complicated, and the best of luck to you getting that sorted out.
I do think it's important to understand that we use the Scottish Procurement Service and our own procurement team as well, and there are some overlaps. Sometimes it's best to be in, and sometimes it's best to be out. So I think I fully appreciate that there is an issue about how we address that moving forward, and whether or not it's contract management that's needed to be put in place. But I think that's for another committee on another. Thank you. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, and it's really to do with the green energy, energy efficiency, and indeed the council's policy. And for some of the members who are within a ward, that schools are fed by the biomass and the design of that, marked against, if you like, the risk register in terms of how many days school time have been lost as a result of the biomass boilers not operating efficiently or not at all. And indeed, as one school told me, it's okay that the charge isn't being met against our school, but nevertheless it's still being marked against the education and against the council as a main. Has Audit been involved in this in terms of design, efficient operation, and then efficiency, and what's being done about it in terms of Audit to address the issue of the biomass boilers to make them efficient, as indeed we were sold the job on?
Can I just say, before I bring you in, I mean, obviously we're reviewing the electricity charges, and the audit is on the internal audit is on the electricity charges, not on what Councillor Scobie is discussing. I mean, I think that's probably for another day. However, I will ask Kevin if he can answer in part your question. I'll be surprised if he can answer.
Chair, if I'd just be allowed,
the whole of your question. However, Kevin, can answer part of that question?
Sorry, Chair. The answer is I don't know anything about biomass boilers. It's not something we've looked into. We didn't look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Chair, now, if we go back to another report, when Kevin talked about his days and what's needed, you know, then if we are going to audit the electricity used, efficiency of the council, then it's perhaps one that Audit need to look at in terms of the whole makeup. Notwithstanding the point you make that it's looking at electricity, that it has a cost against the council, and we as a council and its audit has got to see, did we get value for money? Has it been effective? And what's been done to rectify the situation? I think that's something Audit can look at.
Well, we'll take that forward for further discussion when we meet for our training session. Okay, anybody else? Councillor Dryborough?
Aye, Chair, and coming back to what you said earlier on, whether we're in, out, or shaking it all about, we have to make sure that we do some audit and governance on this particular thing. And being this year well known for having the biggest ICT charges, of course, to somebody else who was called a canny councillor within this particular group, there's a lot of information that you don't actually get as councillors. For instance, did you know that if you actually went on your own Wi-Fi at home with your BlackBerry, you don't get charges for actually using the IT system, the internet system? And all that sort of stuff we haven't been told. So I use the internet quite a lot on my BlackBerry, but there'll be so many megabytes that we'll be allowed as councillors. But I didn't know that part. It was my daughter that actually told me that part. So I'm one for learning as well. Yep.
I agree. I think it's something that we can discuss when we have our meeting for our training, and we're going to have a lot to put into the hour after the training session to determine how we move forward. However, any further questions?
We can have an hour-long training session and then have the rest of the day talking about what we've done.
Yeah. Any further questions? Councillor Wood?
Just a small one. In the reports from the schools, both of them had monies in their banks, which is good to see in actual fact. But what I didn't realise was that we have a 1,500 cash limit insurance. Should we be looking at increasing that?
Kevin?
I'd hope not. Why would we have money lying about in schools? The short answer, Chair, is that's a standard limit that's offered by the insurance company. If you have a fancy safe, they'll evaluate it. So where there are circumstances when more money is likely to be handled and held, we can get safe limits increased. But it's not a move I'd be looking to encourage schools to hold any more money than that.
Councillor Ferguson?
I think that Kevin will correct me, but I think there's a good practice guide for schools about how much they can actually hold in their safes to restrict that.
Okay, thank you. No, Councillor Dryborough?
Actually, with regard to the school reports, it's maybe a question for Kevin. Are you happy that the actions that you've actually put in place will see an improvement in the governance of those particular accounts?
Yes, Chair. This is a type of audit where there's a steady application of pressure. What we will do when we've got sufficiently far into the programme, I think, is to produce a more general report for the Director of Education. It's very likely, I think, that what will come out, I mean, we haven't seen any appalling practices at schools, but we have seen some weaknesses. But it's quite likely that what will come out of this will be a new set of revised guidance for schools to operate to. It's a few years since we've been to schools. You know, we sort of argued about the best way to do this. A more efficient way to do it would simply be to write a set of rules and send them out to schools and say, follow these. And if you don't, you're in trouble. But we do find that by visiting schools, you pick up on issues and so on. And actually, the schools we've visited have all appreciated it. They've had an opportunity to talk to auditors about practical stuff and so on. So there's a little bit of an overhead, an investment required, if you like, in making these visits. But we do find it pays back. And since we don't visit schools any more frequently than sort of 3 to 5 years, we did think it was worth doing.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, members, can we move to the recommendations? Members are asked to note and comment on the internal audit and reports finalised. Happy with that, members? Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item number 10, which is performance against internal audit action plans. Kevin, you again are taking us through this report. Have you got anything further to add?
No, Chair, it's a standing report. I hope you're all familiar with ticks, crosses and stats and that sort of stuff, so I'm happy to take questions.
Members, any questions? Councillor Dryborough.
Chair, it's on the VAT compliance on page 88 of 100. Just looking down at the notes that the software supplier has been asked to provide a price for a custom report. Are we any further forward on that, Kevin?
As we speak, one of my colleagues is actually across to DG1 to discuss this issue. So I think by the time we report back to the next committee, we should have that signed off. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? I know that actually we're moving forward with this, so it is good to see that we are moving forward. If we've got no further questions, we'll move to the recommendations. Members happy to note the comment? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. I only have one piece of further business, which actually is just to get the agreement of committee to add some time in at the end of our training session on audit and risk so that we can have further discussions on several of the issues we raised today. Members happy with that? Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor McKee?
When is the training session?
I can't remember the exact date, but I think it's October.
I actually think it's